I'm so thrilled to be sharing this information about being highly sensitive. And with this presentation, I'd like to talk about first understanding the trait, really understanding what it means to be highly sensitive, what that term means, and some of the related terminology and some of the research around it. And then move into, with that core understanding, move into what some challenges are that are common and typical that I see in my own experience and I see with my clients, and what some flower essence, some ideas for flower essences. I'm not going to go too deep into the flower essences, but give you some lists to work with and to learn more about and be inspired by. The real idea here is to get that understanding, that in-depth understanding of what it means to be highly sensitive and what are some of the lifestyle modifications and essences that can help us move through those challenges and then bring us to a place where we can feel empowered to then share our gifts with the world. So, to understand the highly sensitive temperament, I'm first just going to show an embarrassing childhood photo of myself. And this is something that was a grade school photo. I think it was first or second grade. There was a brief time in the 70s where the school photographers got creative and did these profile overlays with the school photos. And so it happened for, one time. And I think this picture is really interesting because that profile shows this really sort of pensive look of being deep in thought. And I don't know what I was thinking about at the time. Maybe I was not happy to get my picture taken either, but it's sort of an interesting look back into me as a highly sensitive child, a poster child for being highly sensitive. Of course, I didn't know anything about that my entire life until later. Of course, I suspected that something was different and thought something was actually wrong with me. So it wasn't until I learned about Elaine Aron and her work and her book, The Highly Sensitive Person, which I came across just, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago. And she actually wrote it in 1996. And she's the one who coined the term HSP, or highly sensitive person. So she's a clinical research psychologist, and she based this book and this information on clinical research about what they they determined was a trait or a temperament, a personality temperament, and the clinical terminology for it is sensory processing sensitivity. So if you go to look for research papers, that's what you would search for, is sensory processing sensitivity, and it's essentially the same thing as being an HSP. And Elaine Aron went on to write a whole lot of other books on the highly sensitive person. She she wrote a book on psychotherapy and the highly sensitive person. She's written books regarding relationships and all sorts of other facets. She has an audiobook that's a Sounds True course recording, and that's a nice way to get the information as well. And I really like her information as the baseline because now that it's sort of gotten popular in online and with websites and people talking about it a lot more, there's also some kind of questionable misinformation online, and I like going back to Elaine's work because she is basing it on the actual research. So she has a self-test on her website, hsperson.com, and it's a lot more questions, but I just pulled out a few to see if this applies to you or someone you know or one of your clients. And some of these key features or characteristics of being highly sensitive or having sensory processing sensitivity is, of course, being overwhelmed by strong sensory input. And those are things like bright lights and scents and loud noises or chaotic scenes. Not only being overwhelmed by the strong sensory input, but being really aware of subtle sensory input in the environment around us. Another big one is being affected by other people's moods. And all of this overwhelm can make the nervous system feel really frazzled and feeling like you need to get away from it, or go into a dark room and into a quiet place. And a lot of times this is thought to be shyness, especially for young children. I know that people called me shy when I was young, and I never understood that. I never really resonated with it. I was quiet in the fact that I would really look and listen to my surroundings before talking or or taking action. And that's a big part of it, that look before you leap piece. But it was misclassified as shyness, and I really kind of resented that later in life, because I'm not shy. So that there is a difference there. And of course, the sensitivity, having this both this awareness of all of the sensory input, both on a um, the negative parts, but there's also positive parts of that, and that's being deeply moved by arts and music, and in noticing and enjoying the just delicate and fine scents or foods or sounds and works of art. And I know for me, I love music and can really, I'm not a musician, but I know that there's certain notes that just move me, and certain combinations of notes that I really love. And I ask my musician husband, what's that note? Because I really like it in the song. And maybe that's something that's speaking to me. um, and being conscientious is a really interesting facet of this. So that goes along with the empathy and feeling what others feel, and not wanting to harm or hurt other people or make mistakes or forget things. Um, Getting rattled when there's a lot to do in a short amount of time, and just a lot of things happening. Our nervous systems are busy trying to process so much at once all the time, that when you add more stress to that, whenever you add more stress to that, it 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 makes overwhelm come that much faster. So she takes these characteristics and kind of groups them. And what she does is she has an acronym called DOES, and it's characterized by four main things. And that's depth of processing. So that's a very key indicator. So that's really, aside from this being sensitive to subtleties and stimuli, it's being able to really think deeply and reflect, that look before you leap that I was talking about. Of course, overstimulation is the downside of being highly sensitive, and it's because of having that highly tuned nervous system. Emotional responsiveness and empathy. So we feel higher highs and lower lows. We really experience emotions, strong emotions, both positive and negative. And then we have that high level of empathy. So that's the E part of her acronym. And of course, the subtleties and stimuli that I mentioned. So I don't know if any of you are relating to this at this point, but I know for me, as soon as I read her self quiz, I was, like, hey, oh my gosh, wow, that's me. And oh my gosh, this is a thing. I thought that I was crazy. But I also wanted to talk about the term empath, because we use that term a lot interchangeably, especially in this conference. We have this over umbrella term. We say sensitives to just kind of include all of that. Um, Empath is a little less well defined, and so it's a little harder to say. There's disagreement on what it means. Judith Orloff, who wrote the Empath Survival Guide, talks about it in language that is very similar to the highly sensitive person, the Elaine Aron's definitions, and the quiz on that website is very similar as well. But I think it focuses a little bit more on the energy aspect of of being empathic and having that emotional sensitivity. Carla McLaren, who wrote The Language of Emotions and has written a lot on the emotion of empathy and talks about what empathy is, basically says everybody's an empath. So it's a little bit of semantics here. And then she terms it hyper empath for people who have a little bit more of that than others.